Welcome back. I'm Sage, and this is Easy English with Sage.
Let me ask you something, and I want you to think about this honestly. You already know English. You've studied it. You understand what people say to you. You can read articles, follow meetings, watch videos without subtitles. Your vocabulary is solid. Your grammar is not the problem. But when you open your mouth, something shifts. There's a hesitation, a fraction of a second where your brain is searching. And in that gap, the flow breaks. The sentence that sounded so clear in your mind comes out sounding just slightly off, a little too formal or a little too fragmented. Not quite like someone who has truly lived inside the language. You know this feeling, and here's what I want you to understand right now. That feeling is not a sign of failure. It is the exact signal that you're standing at the threshold, right on the edge of a real breakthrough. Today, we are going to cross that threshold together. This is Speak More Naturally, Advanced English Flow Techniques. And this is not a vocabulary lesson. This is not a grammar review. This is a session about something more subtle, more powerful, and more transformative than either of those things. We are going to work on the way your English moves, the rhythm, the pacing, the architecture of a sentence as it leaves your mouth and enters the real world. If your goal is to sound genuinely fluent, not just correct, but natural, confident, and educated, this channel is built for you. Stay with me today, because by the time we finish, you will not just understand these techniques intellectually. You will have practiced them, absorbed them, and you will feel the difference in your own voice. Let's begin. There's a distinction that most advanced learners never quite articulate, but they feel it every single day. The distinction between speaking English and flowing in English. Speaking is mechanical. You select a word, you construct a sentence, you deliver it. There's decision-making at every step. And because there's decision-making, there's friction. That friction is what native speakers don't have, not because they're smarter, but because they've moved past the stage where each word is a conscious choice. Flowing is different. Flowing means the language moves through you rather than from you. The sentences arrive already shaped. The words are waiting at the surface. And the rhythm, that natural pulse of spoken English, carries you forward without effort. Now, most people believe this only happens after 10 or 20 years of living inside the language. And yes, full immersion accelerates it. But here's what I've observed with advanced learners who practice deliberately. You can train yourself toward that state, not instantly, but measurably, with the right techniques practiced consistently. We are going to work through several dimensions of natural English flow. We'll begin with something fundamental, sentence rhythm. And we'll move through connected speech, strategic pausing, the art of smoothing your transitions, how to handle unexpected moments gracefully, and finally, a full fluency practice sequence at the end that will let you feel all of these things working together. This is a serious session for serious learners. So, let's treat it that way. The first thing I want you to understand about natural spoken English is that it doesn't move in a straight line. When a native speaker talks, their sentences don't march forward word by word at equal weight. There are peaks and valleys. Some syllables are stretched. Some are compressed almost to nothing. Some words carry the full weight of meaning. Others dissolve into the background so quickly you almost can't catch them. This is called sentence stress and rhythm. And it is, perhaps more than anything else, what separates speakers who sound natural from speakers who sound studied. Let me give you an example. I want you to listen to these two versions of the same sentence. Version 1. I was going to call you this morning, but I forgot. Version 2. I was gonna call you this morning, but I forgot. Same words, same meaning, completely different feel. In the first version, every word receives approximately equal attention. It sounds deliberate. It sounds like someone reading from a page. In the second version, only certain words carry weight. Call, morning, forgot. The rest of the sentence flows around those stress points quickly, almost invisibly. Notice what happened to going to. It became gonna. And but I moved so fast it almost became one sound. This is not lazy English. This is how natural spoken English actually works. And if you're speaking at upper intermediate to advanced level, but your English still sounds stiff, this is likely one of the primary reasons. So let's practice this directly. I want you to try this sentence with me. The key is to let the underlined words, the content words, carry your energy, and to let everything around them move quickly. Say this with me. I was thinking we could meet on Thursday. Say it again. I was thinking we could meet on Thursday. Notice how thinking and Thursday carry your voice. I was and we could and on. They're there, they're clear, but they move quickly. They're the connective tissue, not the muscle. Now let's try another one. She told me it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was upset. Say it with me. She told me it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was upset. The weight falls on told, big deal, tell, and upset. The rest, she, me, it, wasn't a, but, I could, she was. They move. They connect. Repeat once more. She told me it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was upset. This is sentence stress, and practicing it will begin to shift something in how you sound almost immediately. Now I want to build on this and introduce a concept that's closely connected, and that most learners, even advanced ones, have never properly practiced. It's called connected speech, and it is the reason why English, when spoken by a native speaker at natural pace, can feel so fast and so difficult to follow, even when you know every word. Connected speech is what happens when words run into each other, when sounds blend, merge, or disappear entirely at the boundaries between words. There are several patterns that recur so consistently, you can learn them and start applying them immediately. The first is linking. When a word ends in a consonant sound and the next word begins with a vowel, the sounds link together seamlessly. Not at all becomes not at all. Turn it off becomes turn it off. Come on in becomes come on in. The words don't stop and start again. They move through each other. Let me give you a few to practice. Pick it up. Say it slowly first. Pick it up. Now let them link. Pick it up. And once more at natural speed. Pick it up. Figure it out. Slowly. Figure it out. Linked. Figure it out. Now naturally. Figure it out. Turn it around. Slowly. Turn it around. Linked. Turn it around. Naturally. Turn it around. Say it with me one more time. Turn it around. Let the words breathe into each other. The second pattern is reduction. Certain words in English are almost never pronounced fully in natural speech. The vowel sounds reduce to what linguists call a schwa, that neutral, quiet sound in the middle of the throat. It's the sound in the, in a, in the second syllable of better. I'm gonna call you becomes I'm gonna call you. I want to talk to you about something. What do you think? Did you eat? Could you help me? These aren't mistakes. These aren't informal errors to be ashamed of. This is how spoken English sounds. And if you want your speech to flow, if you want to sound natural rather than textbook, you need to be comfortable both hearing these patterns and allowing them in your own speech at the right moments. Let's practice together. Say with me, I'm going to tell you something important. Now let it flow. I'm going to tell you something important. Once more, I'm going to tell you something important. What are you thinking? Naturally, what are you thinking? Say it. What are you thinking? Could you pass me that? Naturally, could you pass me that? Say it. Could you pass me that? Now, and this is something I want you to sit with for a moment. If you grew up learning English in a formal academic environment, these reductions might feel wrong to you. They might feel like errors. You might feel resistant. That resistance is completely understandable. You were taught precision. You were taught correctness. But precision and naturalness are not the same thing. And at the level you're aiming for, the level where you sound like someone who genuinely lives in this language, you need both. You need the precision to know the rules and the flexibility to know when and how those rules relax in real speech. This is not about abandoning accuracy. This is about understanding the full picture of how English actually sounds in the world. If you're still practicing with me, type "I'm serious" in the comments. This journey is for serious learners, and I want to know you're here. Let's move forward, because we've covered the what and the how of connected speech. Now I want to talk about something that no textbook ever quite explains clearly enough: the role of pausing. Most advanced learners think that fluency means speaking without stopping. They believe that pauses signal weakness or uncertainty or insufficient vocabulary. So they rush. They fill every silence with and and you know and like. Or they speak at a pace that doesn't allow their thoughts to form naturally. But here's the truth. The most fluent speakers in the world pause deliberately and frequently. And their pauses make them sound more confident, not less. Think about the best speakers you've ever heard. Think about a leader giving a presentation. Think about a professor whose lectures you actually remember. Think about a colleague who commands the room when they speak. They don't rush. They place their words. They let a thought land before moving to the next one. Pausing has several powerful functions in natural English. The first is comprehension. When you pause after a key point, you give your listener time to absorb what you said. A sentence that's delivered too quickly at the end, where your voice drops and you race through your conclusion, doesn't land. It dissipates. But a sentence followed by a brief, deliberate pause, it stays. The second function is authority. Confident speakers don't feel compelled to fill every silence. The ability to be comfortable with a moment of quiet, to let it exist without filling it, communicates that you are in control of the conversation. The third function is thinking time for the speaker. This is perhaps the most practically useful for learners. Strategic pauses give you a fraction of a second to choose your next word, to let the next sentence form without the silence feeling awkward. When you pause at a natural linguistic boundary, at the end of a clause, after a key noun phrase, after a transition word, the pause doesn't feel like hesitation. It feels like thought. It feels considered. Let me show you how this works with an example. Here are two versions of someone responding to a difficult question in a meeting. Version 1, spoken quickly, with no pauses and filler words throughout. Well, I think, we should probably, look at this from a different angle because, the current approach, isn't quite getting us where we need to be. Version 2, the same content, but with deliberate pausing. I think we need to look at this from a different angle. Pause. The current approach, slight pause, isn't getting us where we need to be. Which speaker sounds more confident? Which speaker sounds more intelligent? Which speaker sounds more in control? The difference is entirely in the pacing and the pauses. Now I want you to practice this with me. I'm going to give you a sentence to say. Say it first, quickly, without pauses. Then say it again, with deliberate pauses at the phrase boundaries. The reason I recommend this approach is that it gives us much more flexibility in the long run. Say it quickly first, just once. Good. Now say it with pausing. The reason I recommend this approach, brief pause, is that it gives us much more flexibility in the long run. Say it again. The reason I recommend this approach is that it gives us much more flexibility in the long run. Feel the difference? The pauses aren't long. They're brief, barely half a second in many cases, but they completely change the texture of the sentence. It sounds considered. It sounds authoritative. Let's try another one. What I've noticed over the past few months is that the team works best when we have clear, specific goals. What I've noticed over the past few months is that the team works best when we have clear, specific goals. Once more, what I've noticed over the past few months is that the team works best when we have clear, specific goals. This is a technique you can apply immediately, in your very next conversation, in your very next meeting, and you will feel the shift. Now I want to move to another dimension of natural English flow that is deeply connected to what we've been practicing, and that is the use of natural transition language. This is something that separates people who speak English and people who flow in English. The way you move between thoughts, between sentences, between ideas. In written English, transitions are things like furthermore, and nevertheless, and in conclusion. These words are correct, they are formal, and if you use them in casual or even professional spoken conversation, they will make you sound like you're reading from an essay. Spoken English has its own transition vocabulary, and it's more varied and more subtle than most learners realize. Let me walk you through several categories of transitions that will make your spoken English feel genuinely natural. The first category is additive transitions, ways of adding a thought to what you've just said. Instead of furthermore, in speech, you'd say, and on top of that, or what's more, or simply also placed mid-sentence, or not only that but. For example, the system is faster, and on top of that, it's significantly cheaper to maintain. Or, she's an excellent communicator. Not only that, but she's incredibly reliable. Say the first one with me. The system is faster, and on top of that, it's significantly cheaper to maintain. Good. Now the second. She's an excellent communicator. Not only that, but she's incredibly reliable. Not only that, but she's incredibly reliable. The second category is contrast transitions. Instead of however or nevertheless in speech, you'd say that said, or having said that, or mind you, or then again, or even so. The data looks promising. That said, I'd want to run a few more tests before we commit. It was a great conference. Mind you, the travel was exhausting. Say with me. The data looks promising. That said, I'd want to run a few more tests before we commit. And it was a great conference. Mind you, the travel was exhausting. These phrases, that said, mind you, having said that, they do something very important. They create the impression of balance. They show that you're considering multiple perspectives, which is exactly how thoughtful, intelligent speakers sound. The third category is what I'll call recalibration transitions. Phrases you use when you want to slightly adjust what you've just said, clarify it, or approach it from a different angle. What I mean is, to put it another way, or rather, let me put it this way. Actually, what I should say is, these phrases are invaluable, not just because they're natural, but because they buy you time. When you say what I mean is, your listener expects you to be about to clarify something, so you have a full beat to gather your next thought, and the pause feels entirely intentional. Practice with me. The project is moving forward. What I mean is, we're still in early stages, but the direction is clear. And I think we need a change in strategy. Or rather, we need to refine the strategy we already have. Say both of those once more with me. The project is moving forward. What I mean is, we're still in early stages, but the direction is clear. I think we need a change in strategy. Or rather, we need to refine the strategy we already have. These small phrases make your speech sound authentic. They make it sound human. And interestingly, they often make you sound more intelligent, because intelligent speakers don't just barrel through their thoughts. They refine them. They self-correct. They think out loud in ways that demonstrate process. Tell me, which of these transitions feels most natural for you to use? Drop it in the comments. And if this is helping you, I want you to subscribe. Consistency is what builds fluency. We've been working on the mechanics of natural English flow. The rhythm, the connected speech, the pausing, the transitions. Now I want to zoom out and talk about something that operates at a slightly higher level. Something that ties all of these mechanical elements together. I want to talk about what I call spoken sentence architecture. Every language has a different way of organizing information in a spoken sentence. And English, particularly in professional and intelligent speech, uses certain patterns so consistently that once you know them, you'll start hearing them everywhere. And once you practice them, they'll become part of your own natural expression. The first pattern is what linguists sometimes call left dislocation, moving important context to the front of the sentence before the main clause. In written English, you might say, the report that was submitted last week contains several significant errors. In natural spoken English, especially in conversation, it often sounds more like, that report, the one from last week, it actually has some significant errors in it. You front-load the context. You establish what you're talking about first. Then you deliver the information. Or compare, the meeting that we had with the clients on Tuesday was very productive with the natural spoken version. That meeting with the clients, Tuesday's meeting, it went really well actually. This pattern makes your speech feel grounded and clear. It gives your listener time to tune in to what you're talking about before you deliver the main point. Let's practice this together. I'll give you a written style sentence, and I want you to try reshaping it for natural speech. Written, the proposal that we discussed last week has been approved. Natural spoken version. That proposal, the one we discussed last week, it's been approved. Say it with me. That proposal, the one we discussed last week, it's been approved. Written, the decision that was made by the leadership team is going to affect everyone. Natural spoken version. That decision from the leadership team, that's going to affect all of us. Say it. That decision from the leadership team, that's going to affect all of us. But it's a shift that makes your speech feel more natural and more conversational, even in professional contexts. The second pattern is what I call hedging, and this is something advanced speakers do constantly and instinctively that marks them as thoughtful and nuanced. Hedging means softening an absolute statement with qualifying language. It signals that you're being careful, that you're not overclaiming, that you're leaving room for other possibilities. Instead of, this is the best solution, an advanced speaker might say, this is arguably the most effective solution we have at this point. Instead of, he's wrong, you might say, I think there might be a flaw in his reasoning there. Instead of, we can't do this by Friday, you might say, I have some concerns about whether Friday is realistic, honestly. Hedging language includes phrases like, I think it's fair to say that, in my experience, more often than not, to some extent, it seems to me that. I'd argue that. There's a case to be made that the beauty of hedging, and this is important, is that it doesn't make you sound uncertain. Used correctly, It makes you sound precise. It shows that you understand nuance, that you're not speaking carelessly, that you've thought about this. The indications suggest the market is likely to recover, though obviously there are variables we can't fully account for. That sentence, said with calm confidence, sounds exactly like someone who knows what they're talking about. Now I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge something, because I think it matters. There are a lot of people who have been studying English their entire lives, who can write beautiful, sophisticated English, who freeze when they speak. But because somewhere along the way, they developed a deep association between speaking and being judged, they translate every sentence in their head before saying it. And by the time the translation is done, the moment has passed. Or the sentence comes out perfectly grammatical, but strangely wooden, because it was constructed rather than felt. I want to tell you something clearly and honestly. That experience is not a measure of your intelligence. It is not a measure of your English ability. It is a learned pattern, and learned patterns can be unlearned. The techniques we're practicing today, the stress patterns, the connected speech, the pausing, the transitions, the hedging, all of these work together to give your brain a different way of operating, a way that relies less on translation and more on pattern recognition, less on conscious construction and more on feel. You've already been building this feel for years. Today we are accelerating it. And the more you practice these specific patterns, the more they'll become instinctive. So let's continue. I want to talk about a skill that is particularly important in professional settings, but that almost never gets taught in English courses. The skill of handling spontaneous moments gracefully. You're in a meeting. Someone asks you a question you weren't expecting. Or you're in a conversation and the topic shifts suddenly and you need a few seconds to gather your thoughts. Or someone uses a word or a phrase you don't immediately recognize and you need to ask for clarification without losing your composure. These moments are real. They happen to everyone, including native speakers. The difference is that native speakers have a set of linguistic tools, ready phrases, ready strategies, that allow them to handle these moments without breaking flow. Let's look at each of these situations and practice the tools. Situation 1. You're asked a question you need a moment to think about. The untrained response? Silence, visible searching, then a stilted sentence. The trained response? A phrase that bridges the gap while you think. These bridge phrases include, "That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second." "Good question. So what I'd say is, that's something I've been thinking about as well, actually. Let me approach this from a slightly different angle. Off the top of my head, I'd say, my initial reaction is." Notice that these phrases are not meaningless stalling. They're genuine. They buy you time while also orienting your listener, telling them to expect a thoughtful response, not a quick reflex answer. Say with me, "That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second." Say it again calmly. "That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second." And my initial reaction is, say it. My initial reaction is. Now, put it in context. Someone asks you a difficult professional question. You respond. My initial reaction is, and I'd want to think about this more carefully. But I think the core issue here is resource allocation. Say it. My initial reaction is, and I'd want to think about this more carefully. But I think the core issue here is resource allocation. Good. Let's try the second situation. Situation 2. You're mid-sentence and you lose the word you need, or the sentence gets complicated and you need to restart. This happens to everyone. The key is not to panic. Native speakers do this constantly. The difference is They have natural phrases for it. What I'm trying to say is, let me rephrase that. Actually, let me back up for a second. What I mean by that is, to put it another way. Practice with me. What I'm trying to say is, the situation is more nuanced than it looks. Say it. What I'm trying to say is, the situation is more nuanced than it looks. And let me rephrase that. What I actually mean is, we need more time, not more people. Say it. Let me rephrase that. What I actually mean is, we need more time, not more people. These phrases are extraordinarily useful. And the reason is simple. They turn a potential stumble into a demonstration of thoughtfulness. When you say, let me rephrase that, your listener doesn't hear confusion. They hear care. They hear precision. They hear someone who wants to be understood correctly. Situation 3. You encounter a word or phrase you don't know in conversation. The untrained response, nodding vaguely and hoping it doesn't matter. The trained response, a graceful request for clarification. Could you say a bit more about what you mean by that? Just to make sure I'm following. When you say X, do you mean, I want to make sure I understand you correctly? Could you elaborate on that? That's an interesting way to put it. Could you unpack that for me? Could you unpack that for me is a particularly useful phrase because it sounds completely natural in professional English. It's not overly formal, and it gives the other person an invitation to explain themselves more fully. Say with me, could you unpack that for me? Say it. Could you unpack that for me? And just to make sure I'm following, when you say the numbers are off, do you mean the projections or the actuals? Say it. Just to make sure I'm following, when you say the numbers are off, do you mean the projections or the actuals? These 3 situations, the unexpected question, the mid-sentence loss of direction, and the unfamiliar term, these are the moments that shake people's confidence. These are the moments that make people go home and think, my English is not good enough. But these are not English problems. These are technique problems. And now you have the techniques. If you're still here with me, I'm glad. We're moving into the deeper water now. The section we're building toward is where everything comes together. Let's talk about what I consider one of the most underappreciated elements of natural English flow, and that is the use of emphasis language. Advanced speakers use emphasis constantly and instinctively to signal what matters, to control the listener's attention, and to add color and dimension to what would otherwise be a flat statement. Emphasis language goes beyond stress. It includes specific words and phrases that highlight, contrast, or intensify. The word actually is a perfect example. In many language communities, actually is taught as a simple word meaning in reality. But in spoken English, it does much more than that. It carries a particular emotional signal, the signal of gentle contrast or mild surprise. I actually enjoyed it. This means I wasn't sure I would, but I did. This means that's somewhat surprising. That's actually a really good point. This means I'm acknowledging something I perhaps hadn't fully considered. Actually is a word that makes your English sound lived in, natural, like someone who has been inside the language. Another powerful emphasis word is really, but used with precision, not as a vague intensifier. I really appreciate that is different from I appreciate that. The first is personal. It means something specific to me. The second is polite, but potentially formal. I'm really not sure about this carries more genuine uncertainty than I'm not sure about this. But overusing really turns it into noise. It loses its power. Native speakers use it strategically. Then there's quite, a word with fascinating complexity in English, particularly British English. Quite good can mean reasonably good in some contexts, but Quite remarkable or quite extraordinary means very. The word amplifies when used with strong adjectives. Then there's rather, which signals preference or mild formality and sounds genuinely sophisticated in speech. I'd rather not address that in this meeting. That's rather a good approach, actually. Say with me, I'd rather not address that in this meeting. Say it, I'd rather not address that in this meeting. And let's put emphasis language together in a mini scene. You're in a meeting, responding to a colleague who's proposed a new process. That's actually a really interesting idea. I'd rather not commit to it today. I'd want to think it through a bit more carefully. But I'm genuinely intrigued by the direction. Say it with me. That's actually a really interesting idea. I'd rather not commit to it today. I'd want to think it through a bit more carefully. But I'm genuinely intrigued by the direction. Notice what that response does. It's diplomatic. It's intelligent. It shows engagement without commitment. It uses actually, really, rather, and genuinely, all emphasis words to add texture and authenticity. This is sophisticated professional English in action. Now I want to spend some time on a specific dimension of flow that becomes particularly important once you're at an advanced level. The dimension of register management. Register, in linguistics, refers to the level of formality in language. Every native speaker moves between registers constantly and almost unconsciously, sometimes within a single conversation. From formal to conversational to casual and back again. This flexibility, the ability to move registers fluidly, is something that marks a truly advanced speaker. And it's something that learners at every level often struggle with, even when their vocabulary and grammar are strong. Imagine you're at a professional conference. You're in a session with a keynote speaker discussing market trends, a formal register. During the break, you fall into conversation with someone next to you, a conversational register. Later, you see a colleague you know well across the room, and you exchange a quick greeting, a casual register. In each of these moments, a native speaker naturally adjusts everything: vocabulary choice, sentence length, the use of contractions, the presence or absence of hedging, the pace of speech, the amount of eye contact. For advanced learners, the most common difficulty is being stuck in a single register. Often this is an overly formal register, the register of academic English or formal instruction, that bleeds into conversational contexts and makes the speaker sound distant or stiff. So let's look at some specific shifts. Formal. I would be very grateful if you could provide me with an update on the current status of the project. Could you give me a quick update on where the project stands? What's the status? Where are we with this? All three are correct, but each belongs in a different context. And knowing which one to deploy without having to think about it is part of what fluency means. Let's try some deliberate register shifts. Formal. I am unable to attend the meeting on Thursday afternoon. Conversational. I won't be able to make Thursday's meeting, unfortunately. Casual. Can't make Thursday? Can we move it? Say the formal version with me. I am unable to attend the meeting on Thursday afternoon. Now the conversational. I won't be able to make Thursday's meeting, unfortunately. And the casual. Can't make Thursday? Can we move it? Each of these is appropriate in its context. But notice how different the rhythm of each one is. How different the density of words is. The formal version is full and dense. The casual version is lean and direct. For most advanced ESL learners, the work is not in the formal register. You've been learning that for years. The work is in the lighter registers, in the ability to speak with appropriate informality when the situation calls for it, to relax your language without losing your intelligence. Let me give you some phrases that are specifically useful for shifting toward a more conversational register in professional contexts. Instead of "in my professional opinion," "the way I see it." Instead of "I believe this to be the optimal course of action," "I think this is probably our best option." Instead of "could I request that you forward me that document?" "Could you send that over to me?" Instead of "I appreciate your perspective," "I hear what you're saying." Practice these transitions with me. The way I see it, we have two options here. Say it. The way I see it, we have two options here. I hear what you're saying, and I think you're largely right. I hear what you're saying, and I think you're largely right. I think this is probably our best option given the time frame. I think this is probably our best option given the time frame. Honestly, and this is just my read on it, I think we're slightly ahead of where I expected to be at this point. There are a couple of open items I'd want to resolve before we commit to the launch date. That said, if we can close those out by end of next week, I think we're in good shape. There are a couple of open items I'd want to resolve before we commit to the launch date. That said, if we can close those out by end of next week, I think we're in good shape. Honestly, and this is just my read on it, I think we're slightly ahead of where I expected to be at this point. There are a couple of open items I'd want to resolve before we commit to the launch date. That said, if we can close those out by end of next week, I think we're in good shape. Now I want to focus on something that might be the single most transformative element of spoken English flow, and that almost no one teaches explicitly. It's the art of using incomplete sentences. I know, you've been taught your entire life to speak in complete sentences. Subject, verb, object, full stop. And in writing, that's largely correct. But in spoken English, one of the clearest markers of a native-like rhythm is the willingness to use sentence fragments strategically, to let a thought land without completing the grammatical structure, because the meaning is already clear. Consider these examples. Should we reschedule? Probably. But let's see how today goes. Did it work? More or less. Impressive, honestly. Beautiful city. Long day. Not sure yet. Each of these is grammatically incomplete, but each is communicatively perfect. In context, the meaning is entirely clear. And the brevity, the compression, the willingness to let a fragment stand, it all sounds natural, human, easy. Advanced learners often speak too completely, every sentence full and formal. And while that's never wrong, it can create a rhythm that feels effortful, that signals labor rather than fluency. So let's practice deliberate compression. It was a really interesting conference. Fragment version. Really interesting conference, actually. Say it. Really interesting conference, actually. I'm not sure I agree with that approach. Fragment. Not sure I agree, honestly. Say it. Not sure I agree, honestly. It was much more difficult than I expected. Fragment. Much harder than I expected. Say it. Much harder than I expected. I'm looking forward to the weekend. Fragment. Looking forward to the weekend. Say it. Looking forward to the weekend. These fragments work because context supports them. In conversation, the listener always has context. And when you use a fragment, you're trusting the listener with that context, which itself feels natural and confident. Practice a few more with me. Say after me, good question, actually. Not entirely sure. More complicated than it sounds. Fair enough. Exactly right. Couldn't agree more. Say them all again smoothly. Good question, actually. Not entirely sure. More complicated than it sounds. Fair enough. Exactly right. Couldn't agree more. These are phrases that a fluent speaker would drop into conversation without a second thought. And now you've said them. And the more you say them, the more they'll belong to you. Now let me tell you about something I call narrative flow. Because beyond the individual sentence, natural English also has a particular way of telling stories and making extended points that marks a speaker as fluent. Think about the last time you heard someone tell a really engaging story. What made it engaging? It wasn't just the events. It was the rhythm of the telling, the way they built anticipation, the way they used present tense to bring past events to life, the way they threw in small asides and then returned to the main thread, the way they deployed silence and pacing. Let me show you some specific techniques. The first is using the historical present, switching to present tense when narrating past events to make them vivid and immediate. Instead of, "So he walked in and he told me the meeting had been canceled," you might say, "So he walks in, right? And he tells me the meeting has been canceled." The present tense creates immediacy. It pulls the listener into the moment. Let's practice. I'll give you a past tense sentence. Switch it to the historical present. She called me at 2 a.m. and said there was a problem. Historical present. She calls me at 2 a.m., and tells me there's a problem. He looks at the numbers and realizes they're wrong. The second narrative technique is the use of small evaluative asides, brief moments where you step outside the story and offer your reaction or judgment. "So we're in this meeting, and honestly, it's going nowhere. She says this, and I have to say it completely caught me off guard. He's explaining the whole plan, and I'm thinking this is either brilliant or completely unworkable." These asides make the story feel told rather than reported. They give the listener your perspective. They create intimacy and authenticity. Say with me, "She says this, and I have to say, it completely caught me off guard." Say it. "She says this, and I have to say, it completely caught me off guard." He's explaining the whole plan. And I'm thinking, this is either brilliant or completely unworkable. Say it. He's explaining the whole plan, and I'm thinking, this is either brilliant or completely unworkable. Now let me put together a small narrative using all of these techniques. I want you to say it with me and feel how it flows. "So I'm in this meeting last Tuesday, and the team lead starts going through the numbers, and about halfway through, he just stops. He looks at the spreadsheet, and he says, 'I think we've been working from the wrong data set.' And the whole room goes quiet. Nobody knows what to say. Honestly, it was one of those moments where you just think, right, okay, we need to start again." Say it with me. "So I'm in this meeting last Tuesday, and the team lead starts going through the numbers, and about halfway through, he just stops. He looks at the spreadsheet, and he says, 'I think we've been working from the wrong data set.' And the whole room goes quiet. Nobody knows what to say. Honestly, it was one of those moments where you just think, right, okay, we need to start again." Once more, naturally. "So I'm in this meeting last Tuesday, and the team lead starts going through the numbers. And about halfway through, he just stops. He looks at the spreadsheet, and he says, 'I think we've been working from the wrong data set.' And the whole room goes quiet. Nobody knows what to say. Honestly, it was one of those moments where you just think, right, okay, we need to start again." Did you hear it? The flow of that? The short sentences nor the end building pace. The fragment, right, okay, the historical present throughout, the evaluative aside. This is how a fluent storyteller sounds, and you just said it. If this session is working for you, tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I want to remind you, the goal here is consistency. One session won't change everything, but coming back regularly, that compounds. Let's move now into what I think of as the higher register of natural flow. the ability to express complex ideas and nuanced opinions in a way that sounds effortless. Because there's a particular challenge that upper intermediate and advanced learners face. They have the vocabulary, they have the grammar, but when they try to express a genuinely complex thought, a qualified opinion, a nuanced observation, a multi-part argument, the sentence starts to buckle under its own weight. They start a long sentence and lose the thread halfway through. They use a clause where a phrase would do. They try to put everything into one sentence when 2 or 3 shorter ones would be clearer and more powerful. So let me give you some principles for expressing complex ideas naturally. Principle 1. Break it up. A complex thought does not have to live in a complex sentence. In fact, the most sophisticated thinkers often express their most nuanced ideas in short, clear sentences placed in careful sequence. Instead of, while I appreciate the innovative nature of this proposal and understand the reasoning behind the decision to pursue this direction, I nonetheless have certain reservations regarding the feasibility of implementation within the projected timeframe. Try, it's an innovative proposal, and I can see the reasoning behind it. That said, I do have some reservations about the timeline. Same content, less strain, more authority. Say the second version with me. It's an innovative proposal, and I can see the reasoning behind it. That said, I do have some reservations about the timeline. Principle 2. Lead with your conclusion. In English, particularly in professional spoken contexts, the most effective communication structure is conclusion first, then supporting reasoning. This is the opposite of how many people naturally think, and the opposite of how many formal essays are structured. Instead of, given the data we've collected over the past quarter, and considering the feedback from the client teams, and taking into account the resource constraints we're currently facing, I believe we should delay the launch. Try, I think we should delay the launch. The data, the client feedback, and our resource situation. They all point in the same direction. Say it. I think we should delay the launch. The data, the client feedback, and our resource situation. They all point in the same direction. Principle 3. Use enumeration naturally. When you have multiple supporting points, signal them naturally rather than formally. Not, there are 3 reasons why I think this is the right approach. Firstly, secondly, thirdly. But a few things make me confident about this. One is the data. Another is the team's track record. And honestly, the timing feels right. Say it. A few things make me confident about this. One is the data. Another is the team's track record. And honestly, the timing feels right. These principles, break it up, lead with your conclusion, enumerate naturally, will make your professional spoken English clearer, more confident, and far more natural sounding. Let's do an extended practice using these principles. The situation. You're presenting your view on a strategic decision to a senior colleague. Here's how I see it. I think we're at a point where we have 2 realistic options. We either commit to the current approach, in which case we need to address the resource question quickly, or we take a step back and revisit the fundamentals. My honest view is that the second option, while slower, is probably sounder. The current approach has some strong elements, but there are a few assumptions built into it that I'm not sure we've fully tested. And at this stage, I'd rather know now than find out 6 months down the line. Say it with me. Here's how I see it. I think we're at a point where we have 2 realistic options. We either commit to the current approach, in which case we need to address the resource question quickly, or we take a step back and revisit the fundamentals. My honest view is that the second option, while slower, is probably sounder. The current approach has some strong elements, but there are a few assumptions built into it that I'm not sure we've fully tested. And at this stage, I'd rather know now than find out 6 months down the line. The current approach has some strong elements, but there are a few assumptions built into it that I'm not sure we've fully tested. And at this stage, I'd rather know now than find out 6 months down the line. Here's how I see it. While slower is probably sounder. At this stage, it's important to know where we stand. And that's the logic. I'd rather know now than find out 6 months down the line. Now let's build toward our final section, because we've covered a remarkable amount of ground today. Sentence stress and rhythm, connected speech and reduction, strategic pausing, transition language, spoken sentence architecture, hedging and emphasis, register management, sentence fragments, narrative flow. Each of these is a genuine technique that you can take into your real-life English immediately. But I want to do something now that I think is the most valuable part of today's session. I want to bring everything together in a flowing, rhythmic practice sequence. A sequence that gets progressively faster, more natural, more fluid. A sequence that will let you feel physically in your mouth and your breath and your rhythm what natural English flow actually feels like. This is our climactic section, and I want you to commit to it fully. I'm going to guide you through a series of statements, questions, and short exchanges. We'll start measured. We'll build pace gradually, and by the end, you should feel a genuine shift in your rhythm. Ready? Let's begin. Measured pace. Say each phrase after me with full attention to the stress and rhythm. That's actually a really good point. I'd have to think about that for a moment. The way I see it, we have a couple of options. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. That said, it's worth considering. That's actually a really good point. I have to think about that for a moment. The way I see it, we have a couple of options. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. That said, it's worth considering. What I'm trying to say is, and this might sound counterintuitive, I think the simpler approach is probably the right one. Not always, but in this case. So she walks in 10 minutes late, right? And she looks at the board and she says, "Have we started yet?" And I'm thinking, we've been going for 40 minutes. So she walks in 10 minutes late, right? And she looks at the board and she says, "Have we started yet?" And I'm thinking, we've been going for 40 minutes. Good. Now a professional opinion piece. Calm, authoritative, hedged. Honestly, and I've thought about this quite a bit, I think the core issue is alignment. People aren't disagreeing about the details. They're disagreeing about the fundamentals. And until we address that, none of the tactical decisions are going to stick. Honestly, and I've thought about this quite a bit, I think the core issue is alignment. People aren't disagreeing about the details. They're disagreeing about the fundamentals. And until we address that, none of the tactical decisions are going to stick. Once more. Honestly, and I've thought about this quite a bit, I think the core issue is alignment. People aren't disagreeing about the details. And until we address that, none of the tactical decisions are going to stick. Good. Now a fragment-rich conversational exchange. Quick, natural. Long week? Very. You? Same. Good meeting though. Mostly, a few things to follow up on. Fair enough. Say it all. Long week? Very. You? Same. Good meeting though. Mostly, a few things to follow up on. Fair enough. Perfect. Now a full fluency sequence. This one longer, more sustained. Natural pace throughout. I want you to inhabit this. Not just say the words, but feel the rhythm. The thing about learning a language, and I think about this a lot, is that there's a particular moment where something shifts. Where you stop working at it and start moving through it. It's hard to describe. You're not translating anymore. You're not searching. The language just arrives, and it arrives in the right shape. I think we're all working toward that. And the way you get there is not by memorizing more, it's by practicing the feel, the rhythm, the texture of how the language moves. That's what we've been doing today. Say it with me. The thing about learning a language, and I think about this a lot, is that there's a particular moment where something shifts, where you stop working at it and start moving through it. It's hard to describe. You're not translating anymore. You're not searching. The language just arrives. And it arrives in the right shape. I think we're all working toward that. And the way you get there is not by memorizing more. It's by practicing the feel, the rhythm, the texture of how the language moves. That's what we've been doing today. Say it once more without looking. Just feel it. The thing about learning a language, and I think about this a lot, is that there's a particular moment where something shifts, where you stop working at it and start moving through it. It's hard to describe. You're not translating anymore. You're not searching. The language just arrives, and it arrives in the right shape. I think we're all working toward that. And the way you get there is not by memorizing more. It's by practicing the feel, the rhythm, the texture of how the language moves. That's what we've been doing today. I want you to feel something right now, because you just said something in English, something measured and thoughtful and genuine, and it flowed. Maybe better than you expected, maybe with a rhythm you don't always find in your normal spoken English. That's not an accident. That's what technique does. That's what deliberate practice builds. And you've been building it for the last hour. Let me bring together the core principles we've worked with today, not as a list, but as a picture. When your English flows naturally, when you've moved past the stage of construction and into the stage of expression, a few things are true simultaneously. Your sentence stress is natural. The key words carry weight. The function words dissolve into the background. The rhythm of your sentences rises and falls the way English is meant to. Your words connect. The sounds at the boundaries of words move through each other rather than stopping and starting. You're comfortable with gonna and wanna and coulda, not because you've abandoned precision, but because you understand when natural speech relaxes. Your pauses are strategic. You don't rush to fill silence. You let your thoughts land. You use the pause as a tool to give weight to what you've said, to signal thought, to find your next idea without pressure. Your transitions are natural. You move between thoughts with the phrases of real spoken English, not the phrases of formal writing. That said, what I mean is, mind you, to put it another way, these move you through a conversation without breaking its flow. You can be formal when the moment demands formality, and you can relax when the situation calls for it. You're not locked into one register. You're able to move. Your sentences are sometimes incomplete, and that's intentional. You trust the listener with the context. You don't over-explain. You allow the compression of natural speech. Your stories are vivid and present. You use the historical present to bring past moments to life. You step outside the narrative for brief evaluative asides that create authenticity. And when you express complexity, you lead with your conclusion, break the thought into clear, short sentences, and trust that simplicity is not a lack of intelligence. Simplicity, used deliberately, is one of the most powerful forms of intelligence. All of these are now tools in your possession. Now I want to say something about the long arc of language learning, because I think it matters. The journey you're on, the journey from knowing English to living in English, it's not a short one, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. There are no shortcuts through it. There are only better paths. The techniques we've practiced today are better paths. They are the specific, targeted practice that accelerates natural acquisition. They are what separates deliberate learners from people who study for years without ever quite breaking through. But deliberate practice requires consistency, not intensity, consistency. Not long sessions every few months, shorter, regular practice, daily if possible. And not passive consumption, active, engaged spoken practice, saying things out loud, hearing your own voice, noticing where the flow breaks and going back, repeating not until you can say it, but until you can't say it wrong. Because fluency is not a destination you arrive at. It's a direction you keep moving in. And the more you move, the more natural the movement becomes. If you work professionally in English, in meetings, in presentations, in negotiations, in correspondence, the techniques in today's session will serve you immediately and will compound over time. Every conversation you have is practice. Every meeting is a training ground. Every moment of spontaneous English is an opportunity to apply what you've been working on here. And if you feel that your English, despite years of study, still doesn't reflect the intelligence and capability you possess, I want you to hear this clearly. Your English will catch up to your mind. It just needs deliberate practice. It needs specific technique. It needs exactly what we've been doing today. You are not starting from zero. You are refining. And refinement is a different kind of work from learning. It's more precise, it's more satisfying. And when it clicks, and it will click, the feeling is unmistakable. Let's do one final practice together. I've been working on my English for a long time, and I'm at the point where I know the language. What I'm building now is the flow, the ability to move through it naturally, without searching, without freezing, without translating. That's what I'm working toward. And every session like this one takes me closer. Not because I'm memorizing more, but because I'm practicing the feel, the rhythm, the ease. And that, I know, is how it compounds. I've been working on my English for a long time, and I'm at the point where I know the language. What I'm building now is the flow, the ability to move through it naturally, without searching, without freezing, without translating. That's what I'm working toward. And every session like this one takes me closer. Not because I'm memorizing more, but because I'm practicing the feel, the rhythm, the ease. And that, I know, is how it compounds. Yes, that's it. That is the sound of someone who is serious, someone who is building something, someone who is not just studying a language, but becoming a speaker of it. You have worked hard today. You have practiced sentence stress, connected speech, strategic pausing, natural transitions, spoken architecture, hedging, register management, sentence fragments, narrative technique, and the expression of complex ideas. You have done all of this with intelligence and commitment. And here's what I want you to take away, not as a technique, but as a truth. The reason your English will keep getting better is not that you'll learn more words. You have enough words. The reason it will get better is that you will keep returning to practice. Keep coming back to sessions like this one. Keep listening carefully, not just to understand, but to observe. To notice how a sentence flows, to hear where the stress falls, to feel the rhythm of real, natural, confident English. Because language at this level is not memorized. It is absorbed. It is inhabited. It becomes yours not through effort alone, but through consistent, intelligent, deliberate immersion. You're already on that path. You've been on it for years. Today, we sharpened your direction. Come back. Practice again. And the next time you're in a meeting, in an interview, in a conversation, you will notice something. A phrase will come more smoothly. A pause will feel more natural. A complex thought will arrive in clearer shape. And you'll know, quietly and with satisfaction, that this is working. That is what serious practice builds. That is what today's work was for. I'm Sage. This is Easy English with Sage, and I'll be here when you come back.